The community garden started over at Lake Tomahawk, and he spent a lot of time restoring Lake Tomahawk and planning the entire park out. He had blueprints of every plant that he planted at Lake Tomahawk, and he came into my office one day and unfolded the blueprints, rolled them out on my desk, and completely blew me away and overwhelmed me with all of the information that he had, and was talking about, expanding the gardens over there and places that he could do it, and ways that he could implement this or that. But it was just a perfect story about him and the way he was very meticulous and thoughtful, and just wanted to leave something for the community.
I remember when he first started the community garden at Lake Tomahawk. He always enjoyed working out there, and people would be walking around the path, and he'd enjoy talking to them, and he'd invite them up to pick some vegetables or blueberries from his blueberry bushes. He always had a good crop of blueberries. And he'd say, "Hey, come on, bring your kids up and pick some blueberries." And he enjoyed meeting people that way. And he would have work days for the community gardeners on Saturday, where everybody would come out who had a plot and work together and get them ready for planting. And he'd teach them how to plant some spinach or whatever was in season.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Johnson, and I'm fairly new to Black Mountain. Moved here in 2003. I moved from Indiana, and I wanted to open a bed and breakfast in Black Mountain. So I started looking around for property, and one day I was walking around Lake Tomahawk, and I saw a for sale by owner sign, and it was Dr. Wilson and his wife Nancy had put their older house up for sale. And it was really ironic because the weekend before, I had purchased this book, and the title of this book is Grace from the Garden. Little did I know there was a whole chapter in here about Dr. John Wilson. I read this, and then when I went and started looking at property, lo and behold, Dr. Wilson's house and property was for sale. So I went and talked to them, and of course I decided that it would be a great location to have a bed and breakfast. And I decided that I would make them an offer, and I soon found out that on the property, John had a community garden. He had 20 hoop houses that he rented out to people for $20 a year, and they could come and grow vegetables. The thing about the community garden, where it was, there were so many trees, it was shaded, and it was hard for people to actually grow a lot of vegetables because of the shade. And when I bought the property and I wanted to develop it into a bed and breakfast, I sort of told them they couldn't farm on my land anymore. And John went before the town council, and this is how the community gardens got started on the park's property.
And then when the town got the land for the bigger garden, I think they got it from the Clevenger Sox Company, and he was excited about having a bigger space so they could grow some bigger crops like sweet corn and squash and have room to grow. And he called me up and said, we're going to go out to check out this new spot and get it ready for a big community garden. And so I think we started maybe 6 o'clock in the morning and went out to Camp Merrimack and got 2 truckloads of horse manure from where they had horses, and then got some sand from the quarry and brought it out here and unloaded it. And then he went and picked up his rototiller from Plant Poteets, got it all fixed up, and we came out and measured off the garden beds and started plowing them up. And I think that was all in one day.
So when John told me that he was going to have these garden allotments that he was going to have people rent, I said, sure, I'm a master gardener. I have no problem. I'll come down and rent one. And I had no idea that the conditions of what we were going to have to work with. There were briars, there were bushes, it was a total mess that had to be cleaned out and to be worked with. There was no water, so John would run a hose down to the river, and he had a suction pump that he would use to try to help us to water our garden.
I guess my most meaningful experience with Dr. Wilson actually occurred after a really serious accident that he had. Dr. Wilson had a big workshop, and every Christmas he would make wooden toys. And unfortunately, he severely damaged one of his hands on his, I guess it was his table saw. And he was really at risk of losing almost all use of one of his hands. But he was quickly home after that, and there was a problem because this was before the garden was in the position of receiving lots of donations from these greenhouses like Banner to provide the starts for the community rows for the food effort. And Dr. Wilson was largely doing that in his basement with his grow operation in his basement. I did not have a greenhouse at the time. My business was still new. And so I proposed to Diana and Dr. Wilson that I would go and work with him in his basement and grow starts for the community garden and also for myself, because I didn't really have a good place to do that. And so I spent that most of that spring in the greenhouse, the makeshift greenhouse, so to speak, in Dr. Wilson's basement. And his hand was really quite damaged. And I worked on my plants and he worked on his plants. And I really do believe that the work of picking apart the seedlings and working with his hands in a way was really good therapy for him.
He was slight of stature, and when I met him as an 80-year-old, he could pick up a huge log by himself and move it. And he would wake up every day and said, Lord, let me be of help to somebody. And that was his motto of, I want to show people how to garden. I want to teach them. And so when he started the community garden, he had maybe 5 or 6 slots. And then each year, people would volunteer, clear more space, and John would come down here in his little red truck, and he always got stuck in the mud. So the fire department became known as John's escort, because he would get down there, and in the mud, his tires would just go turning and turning, and he'd have to get out and come up to the fire department and say, could you pull me out?
We were moving the garden from the lake over to here, and him coming down and tilling everything, he would again want us to come down and see everything, but he would also show up with a handwritten list of everything that he had spent, and it was all jotted out, usually kind of cryptic, so it was a little difficult to figure out what he had spent and what he had spent it on, and looking to get reimbursed for it. And he would show up in rubber boots, muddy, in my office, looking to turn in receipts that had been wet, had been rained on, or handled while they were muddy. You know, whatever he had done to them, fished them out of in between the seats of his truck, or whatever. But so it was always a little funny to try to explain that to the people at Town Hall, to try to get him reimbursed for those things.
As Dr. Wilson got older, it became necessary to provide some more living space in the house for caregivers, and they pretty much eliminated the entire workshop space and turned it into an apartment. But that didn't stop Dr. Wilson. He set up a whole new grow his plants section around there. They have a little tiny indoor pool, a little lap pool. And he wanted to show it to me, and it worked really good because it was warm and humid from the pool. And he took me in there, and there was just like a narrow walkway between where the racks of tomato plants were set and the pool itself, which had some kind of pool cover on it, you know, to keep it from losing heat. And I'm following, tiptoeing along behind him to get to the far side of the pool. I'm like, Dr. Wilson, aren't you afraid you might fall in here and drown? And he's like, without skipping a beat, wouldn't be a bad way to go. And I think what that said to me about him was that he had lived such a good life, and he was ready to go. He was acceptant and willing to, you know, move on to a different situation. And I'm just really glad I got to be around him for that space of time.
So a little bit of history about the garden, and it was part of like what we wanted to do to help carry on his legacy. Was you know, we named the garden here after him in the early 2010s while he was still alive, and they had a ceremony at the Board of Aldermen meeting, and it was, you know, they presented him with a plaque, I believe, and it was a very touching moment. But also to that, Diana and I, when we were planning out the garden here, were very intentional about the way we did it and kind of carrying on that same legacy. So there is also a blueprint that we made because of his idea of you know, plotting everything out. There is a blueprint of this property with everything that's planted on this property as well. So we wanted to get all of the trees that were here, all the plants that were here. We really wanted this to be an edible park, and so there are nut trees and all kinds of different vegetables, and a whole variety of things that Diana, I'm sure, could tell you more about. But it was just trying to carry on that detail-oriented legacy of leaving something for the community, leaving it better than what it was.
I can still remember John's vision for this community garden and when it began to materialize. And now it's just so gratifying to see that just a few plots when it started have developed into such a living, changing space, fulfilling John's vision to provide food for anybody that needs it. So it's just gratifying to see what Diana has done here, and I'm sure he's looking down smiling at it.
So part of the legacy of this park was to, when we were planning it out, was to have the disc golf course. We've got the greenway here, the garden, and the soccer complex. And the important part of that is that you've got a lot of mixed uses of people, different people that are using the park. And it can be spillover into introducing them to new activities, new hobbies, or just introducing them to a different part of the community. So you have walkers that will garden, gardeners that may become disc golfers, soccer families or parents that may become gardeners. It was just a really good way to try to bring the community together with people that have different backgrounds and different ideas into one spot.
We miss you, Dr. Wilson.